We remember Pearl Harbor as the first foreign attack on U.S. soil in modern history. Unfortunately, we also remember Pearl Harbor as a major intelligence failure. As Vice Chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I've spent the better part of the last 2 years on an investigation connected to America's most recent intelligence failure, which was also a failure of imagination, a failure to identify Russia's broader strategy to interfere in our elections. Our federal government and institutions were caught flat-footed in 2016, and our social media companies failed to anticipate how their platforms could be manipulated and misused by Russian operatives. Frankly, we should have seen it coming. Over the last 2 decades, adversary nations, like Russia, have developed a radically different conception of information security, one that spans cyber warfare and information operations. I fear that we've entered a new era of nation-state conflict, one in which a nation projects strength less through traditional military hardware and more through cyber and information warfare. For better part of 2 decades, this was a domain where we thought in the United States we had unparalleled superiority. The thinking was our cyber capabilities were unmatched. Our supposed superiority allowed us to write the rules. This confidence appears to have blinded us on 3 important developments. First, we are under attack, and candidly, we have been under attack for many years. Our adversaries and their proxies are carrying out cyber attacks at every level of our society. We've seen state-sponsored or sanctioned attacks on our healthcare systems, energy infrastructure, and our financial system. We are witnessing constant intrusions into our federal networks. We are seeing regular attempts to access parts of our critical infrastructure and hold them ransom. Last year, we saw global ransomware attacks increase by 93%. Denial of service attacks increased by 91%. According to some estimates, cyber attacks and cybercrime account for up to $175 billion in economic and intellectual property loss in North America alone. Globally, the estimates are closer to $600 billion. And typically, our adversaries aren't even using their most sophisticated cyber tools. They are attacking opportunistically, using phishing techniques, and figuratively rattling unlocked doors. This has all been happening under our noses. The effects have been devastating, yet the attackers have faced few, if any, consequences. Second, in many ways, we brought this on ourselves. We live in a society that is becoming more and more dependent on products and networks that are under constant attack. Yet the level of security we accept in commercial technology products is unacceptably low, particularly when it comes to the growing Internet of Things. The problem is only compounded by our society-wide failure to promote appropriate cyber hygiene. It's an outrage that more digital services, from email to online banking, don't come up with default 2-factor authentication. And it's totally unacceptable that large enterprises, including federal agencies, aren't using the available tools of defense. Lastly, we have failed to recognize that our adversaries are working from a totally different playbook. Countries like Russia are increasingly merging traditional cyber attacks with information operations. This emerging brand of hybrid cyber warfare exploits our greatest strengths, our openness and free flow of ideas. And unfortunately, we're just now waking up to that fact. Looking back, the signs have been pretty obvious. 20 years ago, Sergei Lavrov, then serving as Russia's UN ambassador, advanced a draft resolution at the United Nations dealing with cyber and, quote, prohibiting particular dangerous forms of information operations. Now, we can debate the sincerity of Russia's draft resolution, but in hindsight, the premise of this resolution is striking. Specifically, the Russians saw traditional cyber warfare and cyber espionage interlinked with information operations. It's true that as recently as 2016, in the Russia operations against our system there, the cyber operations, the hacking of the DNC and the Podesta emails, was carried out with one vector, and the misinformation and IRA activities were on a separate tracks. But there's no doubt that Putin and his leaderships now sees the full potential of marrying these cyber operations. By contrast, our country spent 2 decades treating information operations and traditional information security as distinct domains. And increasingly, we treated info operations as quaint and frankly outmoded. Just a year after Lavrov introduced the resolution, the United States eliminated the United States Information Agency, relegating counter-propaganda and information operations to a lower tier of foreign policy. In the 2 decades that followed, the U.S. embraced the Internet resolution as inherently democratizing, but we ignored the warning signs outside the bubble of Western democracies. The naivete of U.S. policymakers extended not just to Russia, but to China as well. Recall when President Clinton warned China that attempts to police the Internet would be, quote, like nailing Jell-O to the wall. In fact, China instead has been wildly successful at harnessing the economic benefits of the Internet in the absence of political freedom. China's doctrine of cyber sovereignty is the idea that a state has the absolute right to control information within its border. This takes the form of censorship, disinformation, and social control. It also takes the form of traditional computer network exploitation. And China has developed a powerful cyber and information affairs bureaucracy with broad authority to enforce their doctrine. We see indications of the Chinese approach in their successful efforts to recruit Western companies to their information control efforts. It's pretty amazing to me that Google is actually looking to work with China to develop a censored version of its search engine in China. Today, China's cyber and censorship infrastructure is the envy of authoritarian regimes around the world. China is now exploiting both its technology and its cyber sovereignty doctrine to countries like Venezuela, Ethiopia, and Pakistan. With the export of these tools and ideas, and with countries like North Korea and Iran copying Russia's disinformation playbook, these challenges will only get worse. And yet, as a nation, we basically remain complacent. Now, despite a flurry of strategy documents from the White House and DoD, the federal government is still not sufficiently organized or resourced to tackle this hybrid threat. We have no White House cyber czar, no cyber bureau, or senior cyber coordinator at the State Department. And we still have insufficient capacity at both state and DHS when it comes to both cybersecurity and disinformation. Our Global Engagement Center at the State Department is not sufficiently equipped to counter propaganda from our adversaries. And the White House has still not clarified the roles and responsibilities for cyber across the whole expanse of USG. While some in the private sector have begun to grapple with these challenges, many more remain resistant to changes and regulations needed. And the American people are still not fully aware and cognizant of the threat. And they have not internalized the lessons of the last few years. We have a long way to go on cyber hygiene and online media consumption habits. Let me be clear. Congress as well does not have its act together. We have no cyber committee. Cyber cuts across numerous committee jurisdictions, frequently hindering our ability to get ahead of the problem. And it's even worse in the area of misinformation and disinformation. And the dangers are only growing as new technologies, such as deep fakes, where audio and video manipulation can literally put words in the mouth of an elected official, a business leader, or any other leader. And these efforts are now being commercialized. The truth is, we all know as a nation, we are becoming ever more dependent on software. But at the same time, we are treating cybersecurity, network resiliency, and data reliability as afterthoughts. And these vulnerabilities will only continue to grow as our so-called real economy becomes increasingly inseparable from our digital economy.